Hey everyone, I just wanted to take a few minutes to follow up a little bit from my post yesterday about the current planetary transits as we enter into July, starting today, July 1st, with some intense planetary aspects or transits, and that are going to be basically triggered by Mars, which Mars moves pretty quickly, so it's going to be a few intense days. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about squares and oppositions and what is often considered to be hard or difficult angles. So in astrology, a lot of the relationships between planets and our own natal charts and the Earth are regarded as angles. And those angles, depending on the way that they, the degrees between planets, as well as the degrees between the planets and the signs and the ecliptic, tell us about the nature of the energies that are going on both in the natal chart and in the transits. So the transits are the planets right now. And as I said, we're in this T-square. So a T-square is an opposition, which is 180 degrees, and two squares. So a square is a 90-degree angle, and a opposition is a 180-degree angle, but really it's just a straight line. It's a polar angle. It's a polar force, and it basically cuts the ecliptic in half. There are other angles in astrology or relationships, such as conjunctions, and that is when a planet comes to the same degree as another planet. So, and then we have trines, which are 120-degree angles, and those are often considered to be much more easy or smooth or flowing than the hard angles. So square and opposition are two of the most difficult angles. And I just want to talk about this idea. And in the dominant narrative of astrology is this idea that squares, in particular, and oppositions and sometimes conjunctions, are hard or bad. And that's not wrong. They certainly can be. And I just want to describe a little bit about them and why they can also be great blessings, which I touched on in my post yesterday. So a right degree angle, right, is two things that are being basically pulled in two different directions, right? It's like there's a 90-degree angle there. So you've got a square. So most of the time in astrology, when you have a square, you're going to say that's a challenge because it's like two things sort of boom, right? They kind of bump up against each other and then pull. And then with an opposition, you've got pull of polar force, right? You've got this, and it's like they, depending on how they're managed, and this is the most important part, is their management. And this is why astrology can be so helpful, because it's like, well, we can look at this and say, oh, okay, it's not good or bad. It's just, what are we going to do with it? So a 180-degree angle it's two poles, and they can, depending on how they're managed, pull apart. And when you have a T-square, such as what we have right now, so Mars is, and I'm just looking at my chart, the chart behind me that you can't see, but Mars is at 12 degrees of Leo, and Saturn is at 12 degrees of Aquarius, okay? So they're in opposition. And then Uranus is at 13 degrees of Taurus, so it's a little off. If it was at 12, we'd say it was exact. So, but it's still considered a square, depending on the book or the astrologer. Within 5 degrees is a square, some say within 10, but certainly it's within 1 degree. And they're all in fixed signs. So, and so those of us with strong fixed aspects, like myself, who I actually have a fixed T-square. Actually, I have a fixed grand cross if you include the midheaven. So I'm always dealing with these energies. And I can definitely attest to the fact that it's very challenging. At one point in my life, I just brought my chart back to my astrologer and was like, can we fix this? But you can't. So it is what it is. And you have to learn to work with them. And so that's sort of what's happening right now. So our hard angles, right degree angles and oppositions, and a T-square is like, it's pulling. It's like being drawn and quartered. It can be. But also, they are the most powerful angles in the universe. There is so much power in a square and an opposition, and in particularly a T-square. And that's where the challenge comes in, because power has to be managed or it can overwhelm the system. And so that's why we hear things like, oh, with this especially Mars, often again in the dominant narrative, god of war, conflict, but also the martial artist, right? So Mars is the martial artist. So Mars actually teaches us how to channel our energy in such a way as to stay centered without being distracted and focus on the task at hand. So it's about taking action in a very skillful way. It's about being able to move with the forces of power in a very skillful way. And squares are going to bring things into manifestation. And that's another reason why we don't like these hard angles, because they're birthing angles, right? The polar forces are creating huge amounts of tension that brings things into manifest reality. Without them, nothing would be able to manifest. The other angles do that, but in different ways. So like people think of trines as like being much easier, but also they can be much more complacent. And so then the tension comes from the complacency of basically energy building up and not being pushed into something, because it takes a lot of energy to move them. And so then we can become lax, but that won't happen with squares and oppositions. We won't become lax. We will be motivated to move into directions that are clarifying, depending on our level of awareness and consciousness around what's going on. And if we don't have a level of awareness and consciousness around what's going on, we'll get it with these angles. They will bring us to the truth. They will help us to discern and differentiate between what's true, what isn't true, what's happening, what's not happening, and what needs to happen in order for things to be birthed and to come into reality. All of this requires the tension of these angles, so it's very potent and very powerful. And the one thing that I say to people during this time is what my teacher always said is, don't be afraid of these angles. Just practice going slow, listening, being patient, and being as centered as possible, and then stepping back when you can't be. So it's okay during these times to step back. Drive slow, take your time, don't rush into things. If you're not sure, take a minute. Okay, bye for now.